This is CBC Windsor News. Katerina is away. I'm Chris Ensing. Thanks for joining us. It is now official. A trade war with the United States about to begin. The president, Donald Trump, saying that the U.S. will impose tariffs on Canadian goods in the next 24 hours.
Anything China, Canada, and Mexico can do tonight to forestall your implementation of tariffs tomorrow?
No, nothing. Not right now, no.
Not a negotiating tool?
No, it's not. No, it's a pure economic. We have big deficits with, as you know, with all three of them.
It is not known if any Canadian goods will be exempted from the U.S. tariffs. Those details expected to be made public tomorrow. Trump saying nothing can be done to stop the tariffs, but giving some clarity. He'll impose a 10% tariff reduced from 25% on Canadian oil and gas. That's likely to take effect on February 18th. Canadian officials still making last-minute attempts in Washington to avoid those tariffs. They're also preparing retaliation. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau meeting with the Council on Canada-U.S. Relations, saying the government's ready to respond to any new duties with a forceful and immediate response. It has been a chaotic chase for clarity today. Border city companies preparing for whatever comes next, telling the CBC's Jennifer LaGrassa they're bracing for impact.
95% of everything we do goes to the States.
And because of that, this Windsor manufacturing company says it would immediately feel the punch of a 25% tariff.
Anything that we would sell to the U.S. would be subject to that. And all the work that we have in process, we have millions of dollars worth of work in process that we're not subject to a tariff, that now all of a sudden are subject to a tariff, and we would have to absorb those costs. That is something that would eliminate our profit margin on everything that we did overnight. So this doesn't make sense.
Cavalier Tool and Manufacturing makes tools and molds, which are used to create plastic parts for different industries, like recreational vehicles and infrastructure. It makes these molds in Windsor and sells a lot of them to customers in the United States. Any new orders could cost clients more to account for the tariff. With the tariffs promised by President Donald Trump today, Gossman says now isn't the time to throw in the towel.
We have the best relationship of any two countries in the world, and we have to treat it that way.
He wants to see Canadian politicians negotiate their way out of this and avoid retaliatory tariffs so that his company doesn't have to pay more on materials it relies on from the U.S. Across the city at Dainty Rice, Canada's only rice mill, while there is stock to hold them over for a few weeks.
In the long term, this will significantly impact our operations because currently we rely a lot on exports to the U.S. For a company our size, if this is something that lasts for a couple months, maybe we can weather the storm. But if it ends up being a more permanent tariff on Canadian exports to the U.S., that'll just make it impossible for us to compete and stay in the market.
But the sector with the most at stake in our region? Auto. About $50 million in auto parts crosses the border between Windsor and Detroit every day. Tariffs could be devastating.
Vehicle production very much could stop towards the middle or end of next week, given the fact that the vehicle manufacturers don't want to build quote-unquote tariffed vehicles and have to export them to Canada or the U.S. or Mexico, depending on where they're coming from.
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty around how all of this will play out. One thing is clear. Everyone in our border city is on edge, waiting to see what Trump will do tomorrow. Jennifer LaGrassa, CBC News, Windsor.
And once these expected tariffs hit, a second wave could be put in place that will likely hurt cross-border companies, but those will be brought by the Canadian government. Ashley Burke now on our country's potential next move.
Illegal crossings.
The Prime Minister says he doesn't know exactly what Donald Trump's tariffs could look like, but one thing is certain.
If the president does choose to implement any tariffs against Canada, we're ready with a response. A purposeful, forceful, but reasonable, immediate response.
Justin Trudeau meeting with his Canada-U.S. Council, experts helping him navigate the crisis at a critical time.
I won't sugarcoat it. Our nation could be facing difficult times in the coming days and weeks. I know Canadians might be anxious and worried, but I want them to know the federal government, and indeed all orders of government, have their backs.
Trudeau said Canada's prepared for every scenario to deal with whatever Trump does next.
His motto is to create as much chaos and instability out there as possible in order to drive investment out of Canada into the United States.
Others say Trump's strategy is simple. He's all about power, control, and money. That's it.
These things are what we have to respond to and have to make sure we're standing tall against.
As Canada tries to fend off a trade war, ministers are still warning the U.S. that tariffs will hurt them too.
Tariffs makes life a lot more expensive for Americans, and I encourage our American friends that they should also be sharing that widely.
While the country braces for impact, the government's plan includes cutting the red tape on interprovincial trade so Canada can rely on the U.S. less. Sources say the government's plan includes $37 billion worth of tariffs on American goods that could rise to more than $100 billion if Trump doesn't back down, plus a multi-billion-dollar aid package to help shore up the Canadian economy if needed. But all of this will depend on the severity of what Trump does next. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
A lot here on tariffs will hit people in Canada, but we're not the only ones bracing for impact, as you just heard. A supply chain expert at Michigan State University says this is going to hit Americans in many different ways.
We'll just have to see what happens, but I would say that if across the board goes into effect, I don't see any single American that's not going to be affected some way or another, either through the business that they work for or as a consumer directly, shopping at the grocery store.
Americans can expect gas, groceries, and vehicles to cost more. Miller says a tariff on crude oil imported from America or imported to America from Alberta could hike gas by 50 to 70 cents a gallon. A Canadian vehicle exported to Detroit, sold at a dealership, the sticker price could likely jump by more than $6,000. The grocery bill could see the quickest hit. Tariffs could hike the cost of fruits and vegetables imported from places like Essex County. Americans get about 90% of their avocados from Mexico. And these tariffs, well, they're hiking the key ingredient for guacamole in the week before the Super Bowl. How American consumers and automakers react to these changes is going to be key. That's according to Flavio Volpe, head of the Auto Parts Manufacturing Association here in Canada. He also sits on a group that's helping craft Canada's response to these tariffs. Volpe had a bold prediction for what the U.S. will look like the week after these tariffs kick in.
I think that if he puts a 25% tariff on cars and parts on February 1st or March 1st or February 18th, whatever the date is, you should have me on about 7 days later, because nobody in the USA will be making cars or parts or rolling out those raw materials. And probably the market will tank, and probably those silent American stakeholders will be in court looking for emergency relief.
Now, enforcement at the Canada-U.S. border is a major trigger point for the Trump administration. Our Catherine Tunney tonight on a ride-along this week with an RCMP border patrol in Quebec.
If I can't have proper monitoring, it means nothing.
It's a bleak, frigid day as RCMP Sergeant Daniel Dubois makes his rounds, looking for people trying to cross the border illegally, either into or from the U.S.
So people will cross here.
The day's freezing temperatures and blustering winds, just part of being a Mountie. But there's another element he and his team are weathering these days, a political storm.
People do think, like everywhere else in different work environments, about the election itself. The only difference with us is it will affect our work.
Earlier this week, CBC News shadowed Dubois on a stormy day near the Quebec-New York border, waiting for tips to come in and checking known crossing points for any evidence.
No footprints today.
With U.S. President Donald Trump citing concerns with the northern border as a reason to impose punishing tariffs, pressure is mounting on this side to act, heightening stress.
Right now, we don't know how things are going to go. So that causes anxiety, for the membership.
The RCMP says today's weather is likely keeping things quiet along the border. But all it takes is a shift in temperature or policy to start creating problems. Roxham Road, once the epicenter of Canada's migrant crisis, when tens of thousands of people used this unofficial crossing to enter Canada during Trump's first term. Now the re-elected president is cracking down even harder on immigration. That has the RCMP preparing for a possible northern surge. this time under updated laws. These days, northbound asylum claimants are turned back to the U.S. unless they can stay undetected for 14 days, potentially making the RCMP's job much harder.
We're facing a reality that our patrol officers would have to respond anywhere and everywhere in the area.
As the day ends, some relief for Dubois. No one has been spotted attempting to cross today, no kids in the cold. But with the weather promising to warm up, and in an ever-shifting political climate, there's no telling how long that peace will last. Catherine Tunney, CBC News, Hemmingford, Quebec.
Competing with all of this for your attention, provincial party leaders trying to ask you for your vote. Dalson Chen on the NDP's push to win in Windsor.
The battle for Windsor West is on. Ontario NDP leader Merritt Stiles made campaign stops in the city on Friday, starting with Unifor Local 200's Union Hall. Standing with union members, Stiles emphasized the importance of electric vehicle industry jobs to Windsor and beyond.
We cannot afford to lose one single job in the EV sector or anywhere in the auto industry. And so I will fight like hell for those jobs. And I want to be very clear. Our EV strategy was built by the people that are standing right here today with me. It's the workers of this province. I will stand with them and we will protect every single one of those jobs. And they are absolutely under threat.
Stiles also defended Lisa Gretzky, MPP for Windsor West since 2014. Gretzky is the only New Democrat MPP west of London. That makes her seat a target for the Ontario PCs. Tony Francis was announced as the Ontario PC Party's candidate for Windsor West earlier this week.
I want to see Doug Ford take on Lisa Gretzky. I've seen it in the legislature multiple times, and he's lost every single battle with her. You need here in Windsor, because if we've seen anything over the last few years, it's that you cannot count on Doug Ford and his Conservative MPPs to stand up for working people. They're not there on the picket line, right? They won't fight against the scabs. They won't fight the private agencies. They are not the friends of working people.
Ontario NDP candidates for Windsor-Tecumseh and Essex were also on hand, Gemma Grayhall and Rachel Mills. Gretzky said she knows the plight of working families in the region.
And as we talk today about the threats coming from across the border, I just want to say this. My husband is an auto worker. For many years before I became an MPP, I was a dental assistant. And it was his job, and it was his paycheck, and it was the people behind me that helped put food on the table for my children and keep a roof over our heads.
Stiles emphasized the Ontario NDP's support for organized labor. Days earlier, Doug Ford launched his campaign in Windsor, joined by former Unifor Local 444 President Dave Cassidy. Ford made the promise to fight for the region's working people. Dalson Chen, CBC News, Windsor.
A Windsor company has just been called up to the big leagues. Backyard Bats has made baseball bats for the last 2 decades, and just last week the company became MLB approved. Windsor Morning's Peter Duck sat down with those behind the business earlier today.
Backyard Bats was founded more than 20 years ago in Windsor. It has been handcrafting bats ever since. Last year, it incorporated in Michigan, and about a week ago, Backyard hit a huge milestone when it was certified by Major League Baseball.
My grandfather, Joe, just before his passing at the age of 80, had the dream to want to hand turn a baseball bat on a wood lathe. So we thought he was crazy. But my dad obliged and went and purchased him a lathe. Basically, when he was on his deathbed passing in the hospital, we were visiting him all the time. So I took it upon myself at 16 to grab that wood lathe, bring it back to my parents' backyard shed. I spun my first bat there, which ended up becoming a labor of love for all the hospital visitors to sign that bat, kind of as a going away to my grandpa. It was a kind of a moment of strength and unity for our family.
Our clients can come on our website and we have 3D model builders where they can actually customize thousands of permutations. It's so personal. It's that one-of-a-kind item that they can get. We can also do it with batting gloves. The bats can be fully customized.
We were fortunate to be sitting down with DJ LeMahieu of the New York Yankees in November, who told us at that time if we were to get licensed that he would swing our bats. So we have successfully checked that box and told him that his bats will be ready for him in his locker stall at spring training.
Live look outside, a cloudy, snowy look at America reminds us of the day it's been. Questions today about understaffing at Washington's Reagan International Airport at the time of that deadly crash between a passenger plane and a military helicopter. And this comes after it was found out that the air traffic controller was juggling two jobs that night, one for helicopter traffic, the other for planes. As Kayla Hounsel reports, the recovery mission far from over.
Divers are now scouring the Potomac River just down from where I'm standing for what is the second full day of an enormously difficult recovery operation. The DC fire chief says 41 sets of remains have now been recovered. 28 of them have been identified after a passenger jet en route from Wichita, Kansas, collided with a military Black Hawk helicopter while it was on its final approach here into Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport at 9 p.m. Wednesday. There were 67 people in total on board both aircraft. There are no survivors. The fire chief says he expects crews will be able to recover all of the bodies, but not until the fuselage has been removed from the water. The airport has resumed operations. We can see planes coming and going, but two of its three runways remain closed due to the airport's proximity to the crash site.
The two crosswind runways, if aircraft were to take off or land over the aircraft recovery site that is out there right now, those would be impactful to the operation. So we've elected to keep those runways closed.
The black boxes have now been recovered from the passenger jet, the flight data recorder, and the cockpit voice recorder, which will provide critical information for investigators. But look, there remain serious questions about how and why this happened. This is a very busy airspace, among the most congested in the United States, and it's also very complex. Washington is served by three major airports. There are two no-fly zones that cover the White House and the Vice President's home. And there are regularly military aircraft crossing paths with passenger aircraft. However, the Federal Aviation Administration is now restricting helicopter flights here near Reagan National as the investigation continues into what is the worst aviation disaster in the United States in more than 2 decades. Kayla Hounsel, CBC News, Washington.
We have a correction now about the story that we ran about this crash on Thursday's show. CBC News incorrectly reported that among the 67 dead was the 23-year-old son of the two Russian championship pair figure skaters. In fact, he had flown on another flight and arrived home safely. We regret the error. Israel has received the names of the next 3 hostages set for release by Hamas in Gaza on Saturday. 35-year-old Yarden Bibas, an Israeli citizen, 54-year-old Ofer Calderon, who is a French-Israeli, and 65-year-old Keith Siegel, who has a joint Israeli and American citizenship, are the 3. They will be swapped for Palestinian prisoners under the terms of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas that went into effect January 19th. On Thursday, Hamas freed 3 Israelis and 5 Thai workers held captive in Gaza, and Israel freed 110 Palestinian prisoners. Canada's GDP dropped in November, down 0.2%. The latest data out of today from Statistics Canada says it's actually the largest monthly contraction in a year. Now, this shrinkage was led by a drop in output in mining and quarrying, also in oil and gas extraction. Goods-producing industries fell by 0.6%. The utilities sector dropped 3.6% in November. The Canada Post strike slowed the transportation and warehousing sectors as well. And that goes with work stoppages at ports in Montreal and British Columbia. But economists are pointing to a bounce back in December. A lot of numbers there and a lot of cuteness here. A zoo near London, England set aside a day to give creatures some TLC. Take a look at this exclusive spa package up next.
Here at Chessington World of Adventures, we've been doing our New Year annual MOT health checks just to make sure everyone's nice and happy and healthy. So today we've been doing hoof trimming, which means we just pick up the hoof and we look through to see if there's any misgrowing hoof horn or any potential grit, stones, anything that shouldn't be digging into their hooves to make them uncomfortable. Today with the runners, we weighed them. We also took a fecal sample to make sure that they're nice and healthy, and then we applied Hoof Moist, which just keeps the horn nice and moisturized. It reduces any potential cracks.
I gotta see if I can get myself booked there. Coming up next, we'll have a live look at the weather with Colette Kennedy. Colette Kennedy joins us now for a live look at the weather. Colette woke up today, couldn't see Detroit because of the fog. That burns off. About 5:30, couldn't see it because of the snow.
Yeah, there you go. A busy day, right?
An
active weather day with the system that's been moving through. We can thank Texas for it, or blame Texas, whatever you like. That's where it originated. Here, still winter weather travel advisories in place for some of that messy mix, which is mostly that wet snow at this point, stretching from Sarnia and across right on over to the Niagara region. But we are seeing things have improved as this continues to track east. So I'll show you the radar here in just a second. But I wanted you to be aware, again, it's Friday. Sometimes you're taking off for the weekend and heading out on the road. So just know that there's still some areas. For the Niagara region, it'll take till about 9 o'clock before it's all cleared out of there. Current temperatures, still sitting right at freezing or just above. But those winds have turned towards the north, gusty at times. We've had some gusts of 50 or just over 50 kilometers an hour. And that's going to be ushering in this colder air behind this system. So temperatures will be falling as we get behind it. You can see where that changeover was occurring back there around 3, 4 o'clock into this wet mix. And then further east, it's actually going to be a few centimeters to up to maybe 7 or 8 by the time you get over to St. Catharines. We're just talking about, a few centimeters kind of coming on through. The temperatures, because the ground's still mild in places, areas will get some melt here. And then I'd like to say we get into full clearing through the overnight into tomorrow. That's going to happen in other parts of the province where there's going to be a lot of sunshine, but we're still going to have a chance early tomorrow morning for some light flurries coming back. Also some cloud cover through here, and it'll be somewhat variable through the day. I'm not saying we won't get sunshine. I do think at times we will, but it'll be mixing with cloud in there, and at times it will go down to just sunny breaks. That's Saturday. Then we have to get into Sunday. Here comes another clipper system. We're still looking at the jet stream, and those upper winds were right on the path there. So it's the storm track bringing these systems right to us, whether they're down south or coming from the west. And with this, another centimeter or 2 of snow coming through on Sunday. And again, a lot of cloud cover, but the temperatures will come back up again. So that nosedive, and then they rise. We are just looking, this is for what's happening now, and then I roll it forward, add in what's happening beyond that for Sunday, and you see the whole total there's only a few centimeters to go. Overnight readings, -7 for Windsor, but that's going to feel like -14 to -15, and other parts of the province have extreme cold warnings where it will feel like -30, Chris.
I tell you, winter came to play this year.
Yep, and we're going into February, so buckle up.
Isn't that it? Thanks for this, Colette. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Good night.